All right. Well, good morning. Pat. My name is Vasilios Kosmakos. This is my coworker Ronan Hart. We are. I'm the coordinator of the water management project of the History of the Florida Water Management Project here at the Proctor Oral History Program. Today, we'll just be asking you some questions about kind of your role within the with about your role during your tenure during the water management process. And whenever you're ready to begin, you can just say your name for me. That'd be fantastic.
Patricia T. Harden, Harden.
All right.
Excellent. Would you like to say where and when you were born, just to start off?
I was on the board from 1991 to 1999. At that time, my residence was in Sanford, Florida.
Well, if you want to start a little bit before that, maybe where you're from, what your education was prior to the district.
Well, okay. I'm a native Floridian. I've lived in Florida all my life. I grew up on the East Coast, but moved to Orlando and Sanford in the mid 60s, early 60s, around 1961, and lived there until we moved to Sanford. And lived in Sanford about 20 years, and we moved up here in 2005 to Gainesville. I have a degree from FTU, which you now know as UCF, but I had also attended the University of Florida many years before.
Mm-hmm. So for a lot of people who end up working in water management or other environmental protection fields, a lot of the time, the environment is a big part of their life, even, before working, before their education, just growing up. Was that true for you as well?
Yes, it was. My dad was a bird hunter, and we used to go, when I was quite young, out to the woods for 3, 4, 5 days with other family members. And our camping gear at that time consisted of cutting palmetto fronds to make a mattress, putting a couple of blankets over it, and stringing a tarp between a couple of trees for a lean-to. And sometimes in January, February, that got rather cold. So, and I've always had my dad was a law-abiding hunter, and I grew up with respect for the environment and just loving to be outside and curious. My degree was in biology ed. It ended up being with various stops in between, it ended up being a 26-year career with Reedy Creek Improvement District / Walt Disney World as in their environmental services laboratory, and then manager of environmental permitting. So I was not in the theme park except to take samples of water or whatever. So, so yes, and that you might say that I have grown up in the woods.
So coming out of college, what was your first job related to biology or conservation?
Teaching biology at Winter Park High School.
Oh, wow.
And I was there for about 3 years. And then I got a summer job at Disney working in a theme park shop. And they had an opening at their environmental services lab for water quality for an environmental tech. And I had worked for the state Board of Health, the state lab, which used to be in Orlando, doing all kinds of samples and analysis. And so I had the experience to qualify for it, and went from there. So
So did your experience that you got as an educator teaching high school, would you say that was very useful in the rest of your career on the board or elsewhere?
I would say the education itself was very helpful. Certainly teaching, trying to get across the importance of the environment to sophomores was rewarding. And but I had been involved. I got involved in Audubon probably in the late 1960s, and was a birder, and had done a lot of outside, more environmental type reading and current issues reading on the environment and that type of thing. And so I was very interested in that. And the job at Reedy Creek included many trips to Tallahassee later on to interface with the legislature and some legislators regarding environmental laws that were being written or revised or whatever. And I must say that we were pro most of the things. Disney was not anti-environment. So, and so I just got a broad range of experience. And then my most active involvement probably was I am a founding member of the Friends of the Wekiva, Inc., and they were concerned about the health of the Wekiva River. And you can ask your dad about that or your mom. So, we fought for a number of protections, like a riparian habitat zone. Our first thing was to get it declared an outstanding Florida water. And then we got the Wekiva River Protection Zone and a number of other things. And regarding that, on paper at least, I think the Wekiva is still the most protected river in the state of Florida.
Would you mind kind of going to some of the context behind why you guys had to protect, why you guys believe you should protect the Wekiva River?
There were, well, I don't know if you're familiar at all. A map would be helpful, but it's the dividing line between Orange Lake and Seminole County. And on the Lake County side, there was Rock Springs Reserve, and there was, at that time, a large piece of property, several thousand acres, that was privately owned. Then there was the Wekiva Springs State Park, of course, and they had planned a major development over, it was before Rock Springs actually, that they had planned a major development on that west side of the river, and it was a lot of hardwood swamp and riverine shore, that type of thing. And there was also development beginning to occur on the Little Wekiva. And so we just saw the need that if that river was to remain healthy at all, that we needed to do that. So we went to what was then the Carl Committee. Are you familiar with that? Conservation and Recreation Lands. It's what's now known or became known as Florida Forever.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Project 2000, and then Florida Forever. Well, of course, the Environmental Endangered Lands was the forerunner to the Carl. And so we got that on the list. We went to Tallahassee, and back then that committee was open to the public and conversation, and you didn't have to have 2 or 3 members wanted on the agenda before you could get it on the agenda. It was much friendlier for public government, was much friendlier for public participation than it's become in the last 10 years. But anyway, and we lobbied to get these lands on the list, and they made high priority. And we now have Seminole State Forest and Rock Springs Run Reserve on that side. We've had many additions since then in the basin. I can probably come up with a list of some of them, but at any rate, and then we went from there to get the water quality protections, to try and get the water quality protections. And it was a very busy time. We put out a technical report in 1981 that had everything from the history, the geology, the threats, the sociology, the economics, etc. And we distributed that to all the legislators and to all the county commissioners, and we appeared before many of them in order to help gain these things. And it was much easier to work with the legislature then. They weren't trying to kill each other or outdo each other, or they were really more interested in working together for certain things that they agreed would benefit the public in the long term. I would hate to be trying to do that now.
Who was governor at the time? Do you remember?
Childs, and that was Childs is the one who appointed me in 1991 to the board. So
yeah, when we spoke to Henry Dean, he had a lot of very positive things to say about Childs. How would you characterize Childs's approach to the environment, maybe compared to some later governors that you might have worked for or served under?
Well, I really don't think there's any comparison.
No,
It started with Collins began, and Askew and Graham. They were great. It was in the 70s, actually, that all of our water quality, the DEP was we got all the water quality regulations and basically the environmental regulations, the majority of them back then. Bush, he was sort of lukewarm either way, but at least he wasn't attacking the environment. But once we got to Scott and DeSantis, why, it's been a disaster for the environment, in my personal opinion. They have done nothing really to help it. I mean, DeSantis and even Scott tout the Everglades, but in the meantime, putting billions into what will at best be a partial restoration, while allowing all of the natural resources that are still either in fairly good shape or could be restored more easily to go down the tubes, because it isn't politically popular with some of the large supporters to have some of these protections, like giving the wetlands, EPA giving up the wetlands to the state. So I could go on, but I think you get the idea.
So it sounds like you're not so much a fan of the political side of this work that would come up for you.
the political side, again, it depends on who the governor is, how well, depending on your area, if you're working on something local, how favorable your local representatives are to that. And it starts often with the county commissions. If they can be convinced, then sometimes they can convince the legislators. And but as I said, back then it was a much, I guess you'd call it, kinder, gentler politics than it is today. So we it's just hard right now, I think, for environmentalists all across the board. I mean, we saw with Trump what was happening to our public lands nationally, and with Scott trying to put golf courses and cattle grazing and all that on state lands. And up here, because we have Paynes Prairie, as you know, and it would have been prime for cattle grazing or whatever. And we formed a group called, actually Jim Stevenson, who used to be the director of Parks and Recreation for when it was DNR, before it got combined with DER, which and he got a group together, and so we ended up forming a Protect Paynes Prairie group. Did a lot of social media, actually attracted TV. We got on TV. We arranged for a public demonstration. Turned out to be the coldest day of the year in February. And we had about 300 people show up.
Wow.
And march from a lot of them marched from First Magnitude on Main Street to the corner of University and Main, and covered all four corners with our signs. I happened to have somehow by default been made the coordinator of the group, but we had a great group. We had a great group of people. And I heard later from someone at DEP that we were the most hated group in DEP, which we took as a badge of honor.
Absolutely.
So, so again, the politics actually depend on who's there.
So, I'm sorry. So discuss your role in the Paynes Prairie thing you just mentioned, right? What was the issue? What was the issue? What was the context behind it? And what exactly did you guys do to mitigate the issue?
Yeah, and how did it turn out?
Yeah.
Which, I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand.
The Paynes Prairie kind of thing you mentioned? Yeah.
Well, it came about when Scott came out with this. And, we weren't the only group. I mean, over on the coast where you had Jack Nicklaus going to build, and everybody he found out pretty quick, actually, that going after our state parks and things is not the wisest political move he could have made. And so he backed out with that. And, but it was during all that time that when we got wind of it, and Jim got this original group together, that we decided to go on the offensive rather than the defensive, and wait for something. So that's what we did. And not just our efforts, but many other people, other groups like that across the state got that. It just sort of disappeared. So.
And what year were these?
Oh boy. I have a terrible memory for dates.
Just roughly.
Yeah, that's okay if you can.
Yeah, I could go back and find out for you probably, but it was we moved here in 2005, and Scott became governor.
2008?
Yeah.
Pardon?
Was it 2008, I believe?
Something like, yeah. And when he became governor, it was probably 2 or 3 years after that you get my age. 2 years ago was like yesterday, so it's hard to remember what.
Roughly
You know.
2011, 2012, right?
Yeah, somewhere in there, and I can email you. I could probably find that out and email you. With that, and going back to your governors, Bob Martinez is actually the one who signed the Wekiva River Protection Act at Wekiva Springs when that was done. So he was not, and he didn't fight the land acquisition programs. So that's backtracking a little bit.
I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, that was it.
I mean, considering, I thought what you said earlier was interesting, right? Because it's you kind of brought up this idea, right, that in the 70s, right, there seemed to be a lot more kind of bipartisan support. It was a kind of a really strong environmental movement on both sides, right? Martinez is a Republican, but now, right, you're kind of seeing we're still seeing this big environmental movement happening, but we're seeing a different shift, right? So it's a different kind of a shift. In your opinion, what explains that shift between those two kind of different environmental movements, really close to each other?
Well, to be a total cynic about all this, I would say money, politics, influence. When you probably don't know this, but when Childs ran for governor, he wouldn't accept any donations over $100. I think it was $500 for corporations and $100 from an individual. And he walked, you may have seen the signs even out on 441 about Lawton Childs Trail or walk, and it has a pair of old beat up hiking boots, they outline hanging on the sign. He walked all over different parts of the state of Florida. He would walk for a mile or two, depending on where he was, and people would follow with him. And it didn't matter, rural, urban, he did it, and he got out to meet the people. Nowadays, well, I think, and I may be way off base on this, but I think the changing demographics of Florida and the pressure, particularly in the 90s, beginning in the 90s, of even more development, the big boom, developers not wanting to have to worry about setbacks from water bodies or these isolated wetlands or whatever environmental regulation that might cost them a little more money, and they didn't want. And then businesses were fussing about business regulations. Excuse me, let me close the window here. Cut out some of the lawnmower signs. But yeah, and I think that and the demographics, changes in the Democratic Party platforms, this probably goes nationally as well, took Florida from almost 100% Democrat state to now a sort of a purple state, but really has been voting Republican now for a number of years. And I don't have a problem with that if we got people who cared about the long-term quality of life and not shopping malls and highways and that kind of thing. But the natural areas and the resources we need to protect. I mean, springs are kind of literally going down the tubes, flow wise and then nutrient wise. Most springs are experimenting. Case in point, Silver Springs. When it became a state park a few years ago, I took our Natural History Society group on a field trip there. And after the state bought it, and we went on one of the glass bottom boat rides. And I had been there as a child. I had taken children there as a child, and I had been back once or twice since early on. And the eelgrass, the tape grass, when you looked at the bottom, was like a carpet. You couldn't see the bottom except here and there, and it just flowed with the crystal clear water. When I went back on this trip and we went on the glass bottom boat ride, this is what the bottom looked like. Just white. You can't see it, but it was just white. Just that wall behind you. It had with clumps of blue-green and black algae here and there. When I was there were mullet jumping all over the place. You saw all kinds of fish swimming under the boat. This time, we might have seen a half a dozen little brim or shell crackers. I didn't see any mullet, of course. And Rodman, of course, had something to do with that probably. But at any rate, and there were a couple people on the boat, obviously from out of state or had never been there before. When the fish swam, oh, look, isn't this wonderful? It's so beautiful. And I'm sitting there with tears in my eyes, you know. So that's how much so many things of intrinsic value or, you know, to our state have changed.
Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering about your values towards conservation, because obviously, you know, working for Disney and then state government and then in that more kind of activist scene, like you described earlier, those are all very different groups. I imagine very different approaches and values towards conservation. So I'm wondering what your kind of ethic is and how it might have changed over time.
Well, I think my ethic has always been, for the most part, to do what I felt was best, not for me or some gain. And I think that's the thing to diverge a little about most conservation groups. And I said this once at a county commission, when a developer got up, well, our study shows blah, blah, blah. Well, we got up and said opposite because they'd had a biostitute do their environmental assessment, not a real, you know. And so, and then I asked the county commission, I said, how is it that someone who makes a very good living standing up here working for the developer and has a lot of personal gain involved, that their word seems to carry more weight than those of us out here who gain absolutely nothing, get paid absolutely nothing, and can present just as many scientific facts that show the opposite. Well, I didn't get an answer because we all knew what it was, money and politics. So, but that's at any rate. So I think that's been, and the people I've been involved in have been the same thing. I've been involved with some wonderful people like Jim Thomas, who was instrumental in forming the Friends of Lake Apopka. And we just, it was just a group of dedicated people. And so our ethics were not self-centered unless protecting the environment around us is self-centered. But and I don't really think that's changed. If anything, I mean, you had, as you said, if you're a conservation group, you used one approach. If we were at a legislative meeting or a DEP meeting representing the environmental group as much as we were Disney, which they were comfortable with, then the approach might be a little different. You might consider more how it would help the economy to protect. I mean, it's all kind of basic the same. It's the people you're dealing with. That's no different than your personal relationships. You're going to deal different with one of your profs than you are one of your classmates, and you may be talking about the same subject, but and have the same viewpoint. Does that make any sense?
It absolutely does.
Does that answer your question?
I'd say so. I'm still curious about what maybe the people you worked with, what the differences would be between Disney, between state government, and what came after that.
Well, again, the people I worked with, we were all dedicated to one cause, and that was, and this, I'll just use the Friends of the Wekiva to get as much protection as we could for the Wekiva, because we saw its value, not just to nature, but to a growing urban population. And that would be what we would stress if we were talking to politicians. You're protecting the natural environment, but this is going to be a wonderful selling point, an escape, a place for people who move into the area. It will attract them. And people I worked with, it was all that same type of just dedication, whether it was Audubon, Friends of the Wekiva, Protect Payne's Prairie, and we worked on various things just as individuals. They were going to build an airport out in a beautiful sandhill area near Apopka Winter Garden, and Jim Thomas. If you don't know him, look him up. He just passed away, but he was really top notch. And anyhow, so we went out and did an environmental survey of the property, plants, animals, birds, et cetera. And because I did that at work too. And he presented the report to the county commission and got the airport stopped. And it wasn't, they were just, some people would center on one thing, but most people had a variety or a handful of things. One may just come to the forefront more than the others. Some of the people I worked with, or some of the founding members or earlier members of Friends of the Wekiva, are still there and still on the board. The Friends of Apopka is strong and going, and so it's it's just kind of one world. You just maybe tweak it a little here or approach it a little bit different there, depending on the group or the group of people. But there's a common cause. When you're working together for a common cause, it's usually easier, as long as you have one goal in mind and not have conflicting goals about it. And we all have one goal.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help? Does that get your question? Or
I'd say so. Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay.
Speaking of Lake Apopka, would you mind kind of telling us about your role and kind of that debacle that kind of happened, and then, like I said, provide us context, kind of what the solution was, and just tell us a little bit about your role within that.
Lake Apopka?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, I was on the board when Duda finally sold it for a large and healthy price to the district. I was there when we reflooded part of it, and the pelicans and the birds died, and there was a big stink. I still am curious about that because we had been presented all along periodically at the board meetings about all of the different tests and analyses they were doing and soil borings looking for toxic, whatever, and to look at the hydrology. And then when they flooded it, that happened. And I still to this day don't understand how, and I know that it wasn't covered up. I mean, because that would have been stupid, because what happened would have happened exactly happened. How that was missed. And I just have a hard time. Now I can't say it because I have nothing to base it on. But anyway,
I mean, if we're just speculating, we'd love to hear just a theory about.
Yeah, but I'm on tape. And I don't want to get. I just wonder if somebody didn't, not the district, find something in a barn somewhere and that shouldn't be there and decided, oh, I got to get rid of this. And I have absolutely no proof or anything like that. I know I'm not the only one that kind of speculated that, and it didn't matter. The deed was done and there wasn't anything you could do about it. So the district, of course, had to do mitigation and clean up and pay its dues. And that happens when big mistakes like that are made. But now the Lake Apopka Wildlife Scenic Drive out there, it's very popular. It's an excellent birding spot. People are enjoying it. It's sad. And we use Lake Apopka on other occasions when we might have been talking about other bodies of water testifying before county or legislators that look at Lake Apopka. How much cheaper would it have been to protect the wetlands around that and the discharges, regulated the discharges, than it is to now be going back and paying for restoration? And I'd say the same thing goes for the Everglades. Mm-hmm. So but I'm happy to see that that part of it's very popular and that the restoration is continuing to some extent. But there were many things that land acquisition, when I was on the board, we used to do a lot of it. Seminole Forest, Lake Morris, Emeralda Marsh. We also did the Paynes Prairie Water Reservation. And that was the first and only one, I think, still in Florida, because when I came on the board, there was a big battle going on with Orange Lake and the water. They had dug these canals through the prairie, etc. Anyway, and they wanted all the flow from the prairie to go to the lake, and it would kill the prairie. And so we fought. We had a good board then, and we got the first water reservation. We had a lot of lobbyists and whatnot come out of the woodwork, but they were good with it. Mm-hmm. When all the Wekiva stuff was done, and that, I believe that's probably what got me appointed to the board, but there were other board members like Lynn Capehart and Fran Pignoni and Jim Swan and Sandra Gray, who was also, both of them served on a board while I was there. And David Auth started out as the director there, and then Henry Dean. So, but yeah, I mean, there were, I could name at least 24 land acquisitions that we did that were important.
Do any of those land acquisitions stand out to you as particularly important or a project that you're proud of?
Well, I'm actually proud of all of them. I think this, if selfishly on the Wekiva, Seminole Forest and Lake Norris, because they're all in the basin, but the Paynes Prairie, we also, one other thing, stepping aside, the Wekiva, we got a minimum flows and levels set regulation, and that was either the first or second in the state. Orange Lake, those were the Rainier. Let's see. Trying to think. Well, we got the, let's see, the Ocala-Wekiva connector, those purchases in that, Emeralda Marsh. Those are the ones that come to mind right now. We also were involved in other things, the Indian River National Estuarine Research and water quality. I'm growing up on the Indian River, why I'm particularly happy about that. Protection for the Geneva bubble. And from the Wekiva efforts, we also got the Little Econ River Protection Act. So still trying to get rid of the dam, but
Which dam?
Rodman.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So were you on the board when that went up? I don't know the timeline exactly.
Oh, no, that went up. It's been 50 years.
Okay, I see.
Nixon is the one who stopped the construction, and they've been trying to get the dam down. They're making a major effort now to bring it partially so that the Ocala River could be restored. Have you ever been out there?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And did you ever go during the drawdown?
No. What do you mean by drawdown?
When they have to drain that lake supposedly every 3 to 4 years, but it always turns out to be 5 or 6 because the aquatic weeds are so bad. Right now, all the boat ramps are closed because of hyacinth. So the whole river from the Silver Springs down to the dam just about, because it's so nutrient rich. And of course they spray them and they go to the bottom, and we all know what that does for nutrients. And so they draw it down to dry it out, and they leave it down just a few months. And we took a trip out there, again, our natural history. We took 3 trips, actually. People were interested for the drawdown to see what it was like. And you see, in that short time frame, you see little cypress trees and sweet gums coming up, and the osprey are fishing, and the wading birds are there by the hundreds, if not thousands. And then they fill it up, and that's it. All those things are killed. It impedes the flow. So there's a lot of things there. But no, I was not there. There have been, Marjorie Harris Carr was after that forever, and she even came before the board a couple of times. I was on the board of the Florida Defenders of the Environment also. I resigned from all those when I was appointed to the board, but yeah, so it's been one battle after the other.
Yeah.
And continues to be.
Mm-hmm. One battle I'm curious about that you mentioned when I asked about your history over email, you mentioned that the water management districts were investigated by the legislature for being out of control regarding.
Oh, yes.
Can you talk
Senator
about that?
John McKay, I sort of called it a witch hunt, and Henry Dean could really give you way more information on that. But he basically said the water management districts were useless and corrupt and on and on and on. And he had these hearings across the state. And, we had to get up and testify, and, oh, the board should be elected. And I was on one, and actually I said it to Bob Martinez early on before I was appointed, when we were up there and about the Wekiva, and he was talking about electing him. And I said, who do you think would be elected to the water management board? Do you think anybody who cared about the water quality or the river or anything else would be? It would all be Big Sugar and people. And he kind of looked at me and he says, you're right. But anyhow, so we were just under attack, but we survived. Sainer, there was a senator, was he from West Palm? Henry has a fabulous memory for dates and names. So if you really wanted to get all the dates, but he was more like, okay, this is, and so it kind of died on the vine. There wasn't anything except costing money to travel around and whatnot. And then the senator was not too long after that, shall we say, caught in compromising circumstances. So he just sort of disappeared. So personal compromising. So that was the thing. And then we got in a fight with several other people. There was a piece of property next to our Wekiva. We lived on the Wekiva, by the way, during and we moved there in 87, I guess it was. No, 8. Well, anyway. And he was, there was a piece of property next door, and he put in for a permit to do some things that the staff had told him when he did the permit. Jeff Elledge and them said, this is not going to work. You can't get this permitted. And even made suggestions on how to change it. And he didn't. They denied the permit. So then I got accused of influencing the board because I live next door. I recused myself and even left the room when his permit came up, or discussion, and went to court. And that ticked me off forever because the attorney, the water management district attorney at the time said, no, you shouldn't testify. And it was like, what? And I didn't, and the court ruled that there was some indication that I had been involved in inappropriate behavior. And I was absolutely furious. But anyhow, that was one of the many, when you're in a public position, those kind of things happen. And then there was a battle with Mr. Middlebrooks, who had Wekiva Falls, which was a campground and whatnot. He had an artesian spring. He called it a spring, but it was just, and so the district wanted to regulate that. He sued over that, and just all those kinds of things. The Orange Lake people, when they came to testify, they had security at their district because they were afraid they might get violent. They had a cartoon. They did a mimeographed newsletter then among their group, and they had a cartoon, and it showed the water. It showed 9 pigs sitting at there was a different layout then. The board there was a sort of a raised platform, and there was a high desk, and we sat up so we could see the audience. But they had us sitting up there with these messy troughs of food, and it said, the pigs feeding at the public, or something like that. It was it was on the water management. I thought it was funny, but a lot of the board members did not. But yeah, so adventures on the board.
Yeah.
So do you have other questions?
Do we talk about that Orange Lake yet?
I mean, it sounds like it just came up. Do you want to say anything else regarding Orange Lake? Any the difficulty of that?
Well, I said there was a lot of battling back and forth with the local people and the local officials, and then the state and the state park, and that trying to get it done. But it eventually it ended up, and there was nothing terrible happened, but they did pass it in spite of all the opposition. Like I said, we had a good board then, and they saw the need for the prairie to have water. So that was it. I mean, there's a sinkhole in the lake, and people, I didn't see it, but I was told by staff that people had even put an old school bus in it or something like that and filled it up with newspapers and whatever they could find, trying to stop the sinkhole so the lake wouldn't drain out of the sinkhole. And of course the water levels have gone down, but water levels across the state have gone down because of lack of rainfall, and rainfall generated a lot of the flow to the lake, the runoff from surrounding properties. So it was quite an introduction into the board when I came on the board. So
Okay. Another thing I'm curious about, working between all of these biologists, engineers, political people, business interests. These are a lot of very, especially at the time, male-dominated fields.
Oh,
so
yeah,
we're curious if you ever felt that you were treated differently or ran into difficulties in those fields because of your gender.
Sometimes especially at the beginning of, I guess you'd call it a professional interaction. I would feel that way. But after we talked and they talked and whatnot, then I got the respect for most of them, I believe. I had it's all right. Anyway, I have had men say after that were on the opposite sides about my being rather tough to deal with. So sometimes I had one tell me, he was a big developer out at Heathrow, and I said something, and he said, "Well, if they're all like you, I'm in for trouble." So so no, I did. And the culture I worked in, even at Disney, was male. So I had to be very careful in dealing with them to make sure that I had all my facts together, because it's the same way with testifying before a commission or anything. If I got to plug this in, it's getting low on battery here. If you say one thing wrong, everything else you say is wrong. Developers, consultant, or whatever can get up there and make 5 or 10 or whatever misstatements, and that never gets attacked. So it was the same way with being a woman. I had to be careful with across the board to try and always know what I'm saying and not make too big a dummy of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how did you kind of balance all these kind of different stakeholder kind of interests and perspectives, right? It does kind of seem like, you you know, kind of like you said earlier, right? You always kind of did what you saw was like the best, you know, for everything, right? But when you were kind of dealing with interests that are more antagonistic, right, like sugar or kind of these big developers, how did you kind of deal with these different perspectives and like, you know?
Some people were very antagonistic. Most, because with any of things, the friends or anything else, if we were dealing with them, as I said, we always used facts. We did our research, we had facts and figures, we were not, you know, these fly-by-night chain ourselves to the tree and screaming and hollering kind of people. And so I think we gained a grudging respect, whether they wanted to or not, as a group, and certainly as individuals. Now, we had a few individuals that they really didn't want to talk to because they might be factual, but the way they did it was a little aggressive in the sense of the word. So, and we tried not to do that, but we always stood up for it, whatever it was we were fighting for, not by saying, oh, you're a liar or this kind of thing, but just by continually making our point and pushing forward. So, and I think that we gained a respect because even though we may not like anything they were doing, we treated them with respect as professional, you know, that kind of thing. So, and I think that's really important. I mean, if we had more of that in our government today, from local all the way to the White House, why our country would be better off for it. So, but that's how. It's mainly just you're strong, you stick to your guns. You don't have to get nasty about it. It doesn't mean you can't be strong in your argument or your demeanor, but you don't fly off the handle and start saying things that don't make sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's, in terms of specific questions, I think that's pretty much all we have.
Okay.
So are there, just before we close out, are there any more just stories or anecdotes or last words or advice you want to pass on? Just anything you want to put into the historical record right here.
Well, no, I enjoyed my time on the board. I enjoyed my interaction with the staff. We had some really great staff. Henry and I guess you could say Henry and I started out as antagonists because when we were doing the Wekiva stuff and I wasn't on the board and we would do this, and I remember I wrote him a letter one time. All right, this is what, not in this manner, of course, it was very professional. You said this and this and this, and this is such, or this hasn't happened or something. And he called me back. Well, and then I can't remember what the bet was now, but I bet him, or actually he bet me a steak and lobster dinner about something that would or wouldn't happen, and I won, and I still have yet to get my steak and lobster dinner from Henry. But yeah, we started out, we go back and forth, but Henry was good. He realized, okay, what you said made sense. And then we met when we were talking about the protection zone. We even had, and that's how different the board was. We had 2 or 3 board members come and meet us in Maitland to talk about it because we were getting lots of press a lot of public support. And in fact, the Orlando Sentinel, one of the editor of the editorial page, Jane, she won a Pulitzer Prize on the series she did on the Wekiva.
Wow.
So but they came and we talked about what we wanted. They brought, I think, Ed and Glenn Lowe and different people that all your folks will know, but because they were seriously interested in doing it. Nowadays, it's even, from what I understand, it's difficult to interact with the board as a whole, and certainly as the public, the same as it is with the land acquisition committee. They call it the ARC, on lands or management plans. Unless I think it's two members want to discuss it, you can't even get your concerns discussed. So I don't think it's that way with that bad at the board, but yeah, this just shows how things change over time. Like how my state has changed from when I was young to what it is now.
Yeah.
But stories, I could tell you one story, but it probably shouldn't go on record. So
No, please put it. Come on.
I can't do that, but
no one's, who's going to listen to this?
yeah, you never know. It's not bad. It's kind of funny, but no.
You could change a name, perhaps.
Well, yeah, better not.
Okay.
So someday come see me, we'll have lunch and I'll tell you the story.
Please.
Yeah, it involves some members and a bar and some other things, but
Okay.
Yeah. Anyhow, I guess I'm sure after we go offline, I'll think of a half a dozen other funny stories I could have told you, but right now I can't. Well, I can tell you a funny story, but it's not exactly the water management district, but it has to do with the Wekiva.
Yeah,
We
that was great.
We were trying to get the outstanding Florida waters part of the Wekiva. And so the chairman of the Environmental Regulation Commission, George Barley, and I think Vicky Schenkel and some others wanted to go on a canoe trip. So we took them on a canoe trip on the Wekiva from Rock Springs toward anyhow, it doesn't matter. And my husband was paddling Barley. Fred was in the back and George was in the front. And I don't remember what happened. George, I think, did something. But anyway, the canoe flipped. And there he went in the water. And we're going, oh, dear. And he had lost a pair of sunglasses in the process. And he said if anybody could find them, he'd give them $150. And we had a couple of the friends of Wekiva who went scuba or snorkeling diving after that. Nobody ever found the glasses, but there we are, taking them out to make an impression, and we dumped the chairman, but they approved it anyway. So, yeah, little odds and ends. Like I said, others will come back to me. But yeah.
That's funny.
That's wonderful. So, I mean, if you want to leave it at that, we could
Sure.
close that now.
And I just want to thank you, kind of on a personal level, for just kind of all the work you've kind of done throughout the years, to save the Lake Kaiva, to save Paynes Prairie. I mean, Paynes Prairie is near and dear to my heart. I'm there all the time. So just thank you from the bottom of my heart for all the hard work you've done throughout the years. I mean, that really means a lot. I mean, without people like you doing what you do, I mean, everything is kind of lost. So thank you for that.
Well, I'm sorry.
I just said I'll second that. I completely agree.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. But always remember, it's a group. It's a dedicated group, and it may not be a big group, but it's a group that allows that to get done. Nobody can do it alone. It's a joint effort, and I have, through all the frustrations and sometimes the anger you have to swallow and whatnot, I can truly say that I wouldn't change my career or my outside involvements, except maybe to do more.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm getting a little up in years for that now, a little long of tooth. So thank you for the interview, and I hope it was helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And
It absolutely was. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
y'all have a good day and a great Thanksgiving.
Absolutely. You too. Thank you.